Minimalists.
All right, Patreon. So here's what we do.
What up?
TK. We're here with TK Coleman, tkcoleman.com,
Yeah.
Praxis, etc. We'll put links to everything that he does.
Apologies for being out of uniform today.
Oh, dude.
Yeah,
Those
well,
are great. So you bring a little color in the studio, man.
There
We
you
appreciate
go.
it, brother.
There you go.
I used to wear a blue
that's
shirt.
the most racist thing you've ever said.
That was definitely towing the line.
You're such an asshole, man.
Right for saddle C color.
Yeah, right.
Oh my god, dude, this went down really quick.
Thank God for Patreon.
Yeah, man.
This is like the place. This is our safe space. Like legitimately,
Yeah.
these are people who understand us. And Patreon is the place where we sort of think out loud. We test. Have you actually gone to the Comedy Store with me before, right?
Yep.
And their comedians go up there and they're just testing new jokes and
Yep.
they're bombing, they're failing. This is kind of what we do on Patreon. Then
Yeah.
the minimal episode is tighter and doesn't leave as much room for these.
Freestyle moments.
Right. I was gonna say like discursive, recursive discussions. Anyway, we usually start TK with an article that's like a jump off point, and we call it more about less. Because people already listened to the minimal episode by now, which, by the way, we haven't recorded yet. We're doing the maximal first this time around just to test them out.
Just to see what happens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and here's the thing: we read something, and then we talk about it. Usually we read an article, but I'm not going to read an article today. I have an email from my doctor. We're talking about positive thinking today, and I'm sure we'll agree to disagree on some stuff about thinking and positive thinking. But this was an email exchange I had with my doctor where we were disagreeing about positive thinking.
Yeah,
And I thought,
it was crazy to like read through that, like because I had never thought about positive thinking before. But that said, I guess we should get into it.
well, eventually I called him and talked to him about you and something you often talk about, Ryan. So we'll just start with this. This is from earlier this year, February 27th. And he said, "Hey, sorry to bombard you. I've just been catching up on podcasts after a long stint in Audible and listened to your episode 169. Question, does Chris Hogan use a vocoder?" Is that how you say it?
What is a vocoder?
It's like a synthesizer for your
Oh,
voice.
right.
It makes. We have Chris Hogan on here. He's
I know, yeah.
he has like the deepest like
baritone,
Is it James Earl Jones? I mean, he's
Yeah.
competing against him basically.
God, he should be like a voice character. Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
Right. Yeah. It's or Bane or something.
I've been
Yeah.
asking you guys for the Barry White effect and still don't have it. Looking for the Barry White button.
I think Podcast Sean can take care of that.
I love how like when Chris talks, like whatever he says, you take serious. He could be talking about his grocery list, and he'd be like really paying attention, like, oh, broccoli, huh?
He should do the audiobooks of the phone book.
Right.
Anyway, back to my doctor here. He said, "Man, what a fantastic voice." Anyway, positive psychology doesn't work. That's one sentence.
Oh, man.
End of podcast.
He says, "It's a very consistent finding in the psych literature. See the work of Gabrielle Oettingen et al. She's been on my podcast, and her book, Rethinking Positive Thinking, is excellent. Also, see Bright-Sided by Eckenrich. The problem is positive fantasies decrease activation energy. It's as if some part of your brain is satisfied by the fantasy alone. What works better is contrast. Positive thinking followed by a pre-mortem analysis. Then you make a plan, aka implementation intentions. Would love to jump on the phone and chat about this and how it might apply to your situation. You can also talk to Simon, as he's the expert. So Simon's the therapist I've been talking to. Anyway, TK, you know a little bit. I've had some significant health problems since Ryan and I went to Brazil last September, and I got food poisoning down there. And since then, I've had...
I knew I shouldn't have ordered you the E. coli cheeseburger.
It's delicious going down. Since then, I've had significant nerve damage in my gut. It's caused all kinds of really bad problems, and we've tried everything to treat it. And just this past week has been one of the worst weeks of my life. So
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, man, this topic is important to me because I have been like Mr. Positive, and I'm at a point where I'm like, fuck, I just want to get my life back, man. Like it's been 9 months, almost to the day at this point.
Yeah.
And it's 9 of the hardest months of my life. And this past week was definitely the hardest week of my life. And so here's how I responded to Chris here. I said, yeah, I think Chris Hogan was born with a vocoder in his throat. His voice moves through walls, literally. And then I responded, positive psychology doesn't work. What's the alternative? Pessimism? Nihilism? I assure you from personal empirical experience, positive thinking works better than negative rumination. That said, I wholly agree that positive psychology alone doesn't work. That's the problem with all the mystical, the secret, woo-woo nonsense.
Right. Yep.
It doesn't account for the other half of the equation, action.
Right.
Pre-mortem analysis is an important ingredient too. There's value in temporary pain. It signals what is wrong. But stewing in that pain can create unnecessary suffering, which makes me wonder, is nihilism simply pre-mortem analysis on a recursive loop? And he responded, positive psychology doesn't work. What's the alternative, pessimism or nihilism? And then he said, no, WHOOP is the best alternative. Have you heard of this WHOOP thing, which is a silly acronym?
Yeah.
This is from whoopmylife.com.
First time I've ever heard of this is when you sent it to me.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like Tony Robbins' ultimate success formula.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I said. And I said, Ryan often works with mentees and goes through this success formula. Basically, WHOOP is like, what is your wish? What's the best outcome? What is your main inner obstacle? And make a plan. But I think going through all of that, it's going to be far more powerful if you're thinking positively. I think here's what.
So when you called him, how did the conversation go down?
My last response to him was, thanks for sharing. I have some thoughts on WHOOP that we can talk about. It's almost as if we're talking about two separate dimensions of problem solving and living a meaningful life, or perhaps they're just semantic differences. And basically, when I talked to him on the phone, he said that I think positive thinking often stops people from taking action. And I agree that if it stops you from taking action, that is a problem. But man, I've been the guy up until and even now, like I've done my best to think positively through this, and I've had serious struggles over the last several weeks, especially. But even in there, it's like the rumination doesn't help me at all, right? Being negative doesn't help me at all. So TK, I know you're a positive, you are a fan of positive thinking, but I think you can add some nuance to this.
So I have learned the hard way to avoid the language of positive thinking. I would definitely describe myself as a positive thinker. Most people have described me that way. But I think the language is so hopelessly co-opted and misunderstood that I would never put myself in the position of trying to defend positive thinking. I would rather just change my language so I can have a much easier conversation. So instead of positive thinking, I now use terms like self-nourishing or self-empowering or constructive thinking, right? Because either your thought patterns are moving you in a direction that is opposite of your pursuit and practice of well-being, or it's moving you in a direction that supports your pursuit of and your practice of well-being. So typically when people attack positive thinking and they say, oh, I don't believe in positive thinking, what they mean is something like this: thoughts that make you feel good or comfortable, right? And clearly there are important things we need to think about in life that don't make you feel comfortable. So if your doctor says, hey, you have this illness and you need to study this disease and you need to make these changes in your diet and your lifestyle, that may not feel very good, but by putting your attention on those things, you're moving in the direction of health, right? You're thinking in a way that is supporting your pursuit and practice of well-being. And that's a good thing, but it's not stereotypically positive. And there are other things that might seem negative. They might make you feel negative, like acknowledging that you have $50,000 in debt. That doesn't feel good, right? That sucks. But what's the most important part of a map? It's not where you want to go. It's the part that says you are here, right? And knowing where you are may not feel so good, but that's actually a good thing. It moves you in the direction of a healthier, better life. So I like to think about being a constructive thinker or being a creative thinker. Are your thoughts moving you in a good direction? Are they making you healthier, or are they putting you in the best possible position to be healthy, rather than getting caught up in the semantics of positivity? But I do have to say something about the semantics of it, because I think positivity gets an unfair treatment. So this statement, positive psychology doesn't work. Whoa. I'm sorry. Positive psychology is an actual field of study. It is a real legitimate discipline. See Martin Seligman, the author of Learned Optimism. See Daniel Gilbert, who is a professor at Harvard University, does a lot of research in the field of positive psychology. He has an excellent book called Surprised by Happiness. You can actually preview his work. He's got 3 different TED Talks. One of my favorite is What Your Mother Didn't Teach You About Happiness. And positive psychology is a field where a lot of different people are doing some very interesting research, and there is no one single monolithic conclusion of positive psychology. So to say positive psychology doesn't work is like saying physical fitness doesn't work. Well, what does that mean? Like, sure, there are some forms of exercise that might not work for you. There may be some ways of working out that will cause more harm than good. But what in the world does it mean to say this entire field doesn't work? There is no single conclusion that defines the field. People like Martin Seligman and Daniel Gilbert, when you engage their works, would agree with everything that you said with Whoop, because their research doesn't support the idea that feeling bad is some kind of sin, or acknowledging so-called negative realities is a terrible thing that leads to an unhealthy life. People that are doing research in positive psychology say, hey, sometimes you need to put your attention on the things that make you uncomfortable, on the things that make you feel good, feel bad, in order to live a healthy life. So when people think about positive psychology, they usually have in mind some cheesy motivational speaker who teaches a philosophy of delusion, and they usually can't name them. You know, they usually, you know, don't know about the people that are doing the academic research, and they just sort of attack, you know, the 1 or 2 people that they heard on Oprah Winfrey talking about the law of attraction and telling people that if you close your eyes and visualize $1 million check, it'll show up without any effort. And they sort of equate that with positive psychology, but it's actually an intellectually sophisticated field with a lot of nuance to it. You can't just boil it down to only think about what makes you feel good. No positive psychologist believes that.
Yeah. I mean, I think trying to make positive thinking like a binary thing, either it's good or it's bad. Yeah. It's a tool. I mean, it is something that I think, like any other tool, if you use it appropriately, it can totally add benefits to your life. I mean, when I think about when I was paying off debt, I absolutely used the positive thinking in the sense of like, yeah, I know that I can't really go out to eat as much as I want this month because eventually I'm going to have no debt. And like, that's a really good feeling. And like hanging on to that reward or ruminating on that reward, like totally motivated me internally to pay off my debt as soon as possible. Yeah. So, but I mean, saying it works or it doesn't work, you're right. No matter, you know, whether you say it works, yeah, it does work. And when you say it doesn't work, yeah, it doesn't work. It depends on how you use it.
It sounds to me like what we're saying here is that you can think positively, you can hope, really it's about hope for me. And that's the word that really stands out. And I think that's the reason this last week has been so difficult for me, because not a whole lot has changed. But I've lost a significant amount of hope. You know, despair, it says the same thing about the future, just the obverse side. Like there's no cure, there's no fix, there's no solution, right? And so when we realize like, oh, there is a solution, even though it's going to take a lot of work and it's hard to get there. At least I have some hope, and that allows me to feel good enough to pursue the action necessary.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. Hope. And that is a positive thinking aspect. So if we don't have any hope, then what the hell do we have? You know, we have despair. Right. Yeah. No. Oh, go ahead.
I'll throw something else in the pot, because sometimes hope is even hard to find, right? So what do you do when you don't have hope? I believe there's a basis for quote unquote positivity that doesn't even require faith in a positive outcome. So let's take a lesson from nature. Let's say a gazelle is out and about, and here's the rumbling in the bushes, and out comes a lion, and that lion is getting ready to chase you. Is there any reason to believe that you're going to escape? Nope.
No.
Right? No. All the evidence points to you are probably going to die, and it's going to be painful. That's what the evidence suggests, right? It would be rational to accept that as a true proposition. But what does the gazelle do? It runs like hell. Why? Because it knows or believes or has evidence that it's going to escape? No. But because what other option is there? Right? It's not a faith in a positive outcome. It's the recognition that there is no other alternative that gives me the slightest possibility of survival other than to fight for my life. So when you know, one of the best pieces of advice I ever received was from Peter Daniels, who said, in the course of your lifetime, read 1,000 biographies, because in doing so, you'll build a vast vocabulary for overcoming incredible odds. And when you read the biographies of people, great leaders, great achievers, great innovators who have overcome incredible odds, many of these people didn't have faith in a positive outcome. They didn't have any sort of evidence or any sort of insight from God that said, I'm guaranteeing you success. But they fought like hell because there was no other alternative. When you read Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl didn't fight for his life every day because he had some sort of evidence that he was going to get out of a concentration camp, right? He just had one option. And he chose the only option that he had.
Well, so there's two options, right? There's always the option of death. I mean, that's why suicide rates are so high right now.
Yeah.
You know, especially where Ryan and I come from, there's this sort of, there's this huge opioid epidemic, right, in Dayton, Ohio, and it's all over America. But and all communities are affected. It's young, old, rich, poor, black, white. It's all communities have been affected by this, and to me, it's a loss of hope. And we find different ways to pacify ourselves quite often. And sometimes it's because there was some sort of initial pain. You know, when Ryan, and he's talked about this, and we talk about it in a book we're working on now. When Ryan was on opioids, the thing there was like, there was an actual pain. Like he broke his hand, and it was like, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Hey, thanks for all these Percocet. Appreciate it. Yeah.
And pretty soon that turns into $5,000 a month habit.
Right.
And then other people do really drastic things because they've lost hope and they're spiraling downward. And what about people there where they feel like, man, I just have trouble. I'm so far beyond thinking positively in this moment.
Yeah. So I think about this in terms of sports. Are you guys familiar with the play called a Hail Mary?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what is a Hail Mary for our listeners who may not be as into sports as we are?
That's when Michael Jordan pushes
Russell
before he takes that game-winning shot. That's is that a Hail Mary?
No. That's called a revisionist account of history.
Thankfully it's on video, man. Byron Russell is still mad that he's on a million posters.
Those referees are paid professionals. That's all I gotta say.
Okay, so for people who are unfamiliar with the Hail Mary, Ryan, what is it?
Yeah, it's basically it's when it's a football term, and it's when a quarterback essentially lines up in a shotgun position, which means that he's far back from the center, so he gets it snapped to him far behind the line. All of his receivers run as far down the field as they can, and he just throws the ball and prays, says some Hail Marys, and hopes that one of his receivers catches it.
Yep. And the thing about Hail Marys is you never see people open the game with a Hail Mary or do a Hail Mary play in the middle of a game, because statistically it is a low probability effort at scoring. It's pretty much a dumb play to run because the odds that it'll work are really, really low. So rationality doesn't justify throwing a Hail Mary. But whenever people use it, it's in a moment of desperation. It's the final play of the game. You don't have enough time to run a really good play.
Or a series of good plays. You absolutely must score on this one possession. So it's not good enough to get yourself in a position to score. You must score. And so the only way to win is to be lucky. So you don't do it because you believe in luck or because you think luck is probable. You do it because if you're going to win, it's going to be by luck. And that's it. And you throw that Hail Mary not because you have faith in a positive outcome, not because you know it's going to work, not because you can give a good argument for it. You throw a Hail Mary because, hey, this is the only shot I have at winning the game,
And I'm going to acknowledge that that's where I am. I'm going to be honest about that, and I'm going to see what I can do. I think we talked about a similar concept in one of our first episodes. We talked about how instead of pressuring yourself to find your passion, you instead you can open up yourself to the possibility of just being willing to try something new. Right? You don't have to know what you need to do or know what you want to do. Just be open to possibility. Be willing to try something new. And I think that is applicable here too when it comes to positive thinking. You don't have to know what's going to come next. You don't even have to have faith that things are going to work out. You just have to be willing to try something new.
Yeah. Right. But sometimes trying something new, man, I was just reading this. I wish I had this printed out. Because I also believe in there's a essay on our website called Just Do Something, and it's sort of, it plays on the just do it cliche. Like there's a reason that pithy saying has lasted like several generations at this point, you know, where just do it is still applicable to teenagers today. But what do they mean by that? It's like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but you're saying just do something. But there are times where, like you just said, a Hail Mary is not appropriate, right? In fact, most times the Hail Mary is not appropriate.
Right, but if you're in a position where you say there's nothing I can do, that's an argument that a Hail Mary probably is appropriate.
But sometimes we say that and it's not true. Would you acknowledge that?
Sometimes we say there's nothing.
Yeah, I've tried everything, and it's like,
right, like literally tell me the 100 things you've tried.
It's like, well, no, but I've been hitting my head against the wall repeatedly, and nothing's happened still.
Right,
and it's like, well, yeah, that hasn't fixed your problem, right?
Yeah.
We say we've done everything, but we've tried 3 things that have failed, and we did them half-ass anyway, right?
Yeah. So I'll give a charitable interpretation of that. I think I saw this on like a meme or something like that, where one friend says to the other, "Why do you insist on always taking the hard way?" And the friend responds by saying, "Why do you insist on believing that I see another way?" So I think when people do say I've tried everything, that what that means is I have reached the edge of my knowledge, right? I have tried everything that I know to do, and I'm aware of no other options. And so I think another great alternative to just trying to be positive about it is knowledge, is information, is, you know, I think it's far more empowering to pursue experiences and to pursue knowledge that can expand your understanding of the world, that can broaden your horizons, as opposed to just trying to be positive. So much of what we call being positive is basically like, it's like walking into a bathroom, someone hasn't flushed the toilet, and you're just going to take some perfume and spray it on top of that.
It's okay.
I mean, come on, man. I mean, you're not getting rid of the problem, right? That's not doing anything. And I think a lot of efforts to be positive are based on a similar kind of methodology. We don't deal with what's under the hood. But I think getting some new ideas is a way to sort of expand your imagination, so you're not so easily brought to a place where you say, I've tried everything. And I think that's why reading biographies, studying the lives of successful people is very important. You know, James Baldwin said, you think you are alone with your suffering in the world until you begin to read, until you begin to study the lives of others. And you realize that all of the problems that you're wrestling with, millions of other people throughout history have had their own variation of that, and they have a piece of the puzzle that's useful to you. You know, that's different from reading a motivational book, but it gives you conceptual tools that you can use to, you know, construct your own life.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is like you gotta find different perspectives, and whenever you can find a different perspective, that is when you start to come up with ideas on how to take some actions that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before you had that knowledge. And like I think the problem with positive thinking is like, when we just rely on positive thinking, just like you said in the email, that is a problem. Like just relying on The Secret, which is, you know, I feel like is the most extreme example of relying on positive thinking. Like that.
I think there are other extreme examples, right?
Like,
I mean,
that's the one that usually gets stereotyped and mocked.
Cults.
Yeah, cults. Yeah, oh yeah, that's true. But even I would even argue with cults though. Like you have a community of like it's not just the positive thinking. Like there's a community of people that are encouraging you. There's some beliefs that are involved with that.
Faith in the authority of the leader.
Right.
The chosen one.
Yeah.
But when we rely just on positive thinking, that I mean maybe that is the Hail Mary, is relying on positive thinking. But like you said, it has such a low probability. people relying on positive thinking just to get them through their lives, like that's a really poor expectation, I think. And I think that is what your doctor was saying, Josh, is like people who just sit around, they're like, you know what, I just got to stay positive and everything will be okay. I mean, if there's someone watching this or listening to this, one of our patrons, write us and let us know how positive thinking alone is what, and seriously, like, I mean, that's a real call. Like, please write us and let us know, email us, theminimalists@theminimalists.com. Let us know how positive thinking alone was able to pull someone out. Like, continuing with my story about how I was hooked on to opioids, I got to a point where I saw myself bifurcating one or two ways, man. Like, all my friends who were doing that, they were all eventually were on heroin eventually. Mm-hmm. And I always,
why is that? Is it because it's easier to access?
Yeah, and it's cheaper. And then and that's just it. It's like, it starts out where you can spend $10 and you can get high for 2 days for $10
with heroin.
Right, but then it turns into $100 a day. Like, one pill lasts you 2 days when you start out, and then you got to start buying 10 pills a day.
Right.
So, and I always tell myself, like, oh, dude, I'm never gonna do heroin. Like, especially when I was a kid, I'm like, oh man, like, I'm never, the heroin's like, that's like elite drug addicts. Like, I'll never be that elite drug addict.
That's the line I won't cross. Right. And we tell ourselves these stories that say all these other lines are fine. Like, there's an infinite number of lines up till there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But for you, that was the line.
That was the line. So, like, and what happened is I got to a point where I was going through withdrawal, so I was looking for pills, couldn't find them, but heroin was available. And like, I had like a brief thought where I was like, I mean, it is just another opiate, and I don't have to inject it. I'll just snort it. But like, as I'm having this thought process, I'm like, I've seen my friends have the same exact thought process.
You're moving the line.
Right, exactly.
Well, now the line is injecting heroin, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. So, like, as soon as I even caught myself thinking that, I'm like, oh, dude, like, you need help. Like, there's a problem here. So it was not positive thinking that got me out of that situation. It was me going and seeking professional help to not only be counseled, but I didn't get on methadone, thank God, but like Suboxone, I was on for a little bit. So like, I used a system that was in place to help me get off of there, and it took me a long time before I even had started to be able to have the positive thinking. So to the doctor's point too, looking at that road of taking heroin, looking at the negative effects of what I had already done to my life, looking at the negative effects of if I did go down that heroin road, being in that negative state, it did force me to choose a different path.
Yeah.
So and that's interesting to me. Like, there is some benefits to negative thinking sometimes.
Maybe I'll say it like this. For me, positive thinking makes everything better. But let me be clear when I say that. It makes everything better. It does not replace any of those things. And I think that's the key. Even back in the corporate world, when things weren't feeling outstanding, like, I would do positive self-talk, where it's just like, I walk into Starbucks and they would write Mr. Outstanding on my cup, because every time that I walk in there, how you doing? I'm outstanding. Because it changes the way that I feel. It changes my physiology. It changes my mental state, and it makes the day better for me in that circumstance. However, if it makes your life comfortable, as TK alluded to earlier, that was a big problem with my corporate life. Throughout my 20s, like, everything was a 6 out of 10. And so it was too comfortable to make a significant change. But it wasn't enough pain that I said, hey, I have to do something right now. Yeah. I have to do the Hail Mary or whatever leads up to the Hail Mary or whatever. I have to take some sort of action. And so maybe in the moment, positive thinking did make everything better, but maybe it also postponed a low-level type of suffering.
Kind of a Band-Aid, almost, the positive thinking in that situation. Because it's like this
kind of a cast where you're like, I don't really need this cast. Maybe like my arm would work fine without it. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm mixing metaphors here.
Well, it seems like the problem in your situation was that it was a kind of positive thinking divorced from logic, right? That you call it positive thinking because it made you feel good, but it was still self-defeating because it ignored important evidence pointing you to the fact that you were doing things that just weren't right for you. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with focusing on something just because it makes you feel good. That's not inherently bad. Like, feeling good isn't bad, you know? Right. We sort of treat that like you're just being irrational. I had a friend one time ask me how it was going, and I said, it's going pretty well. And he says, is it really going well, or is that just the story you're telling yourself? I said, I don't acknowledge the difference, man. I don't acknowledge the difference, right? And there's nothing wrong with telling myself a story that makes me feel good, unless, of course, my act of telling that story causes me to ignore important evidence about my life. Right. And that seems to be the problem. I think one way I like to put it is, if I stated it as a principle, is I would say, focus your attention in a way that feels good, as long as there are no logically or morally compelling reasons to do otherwise. Now, in the case of a note like that from a doctor, there is a logically and morally compelling reason for you to put your attention on some things that aren't going to feel so good, but that's good for you, even though it doesn't feel good to you, you know? But if you're just sitting around and you're waiting in line and you're thinking, oh, my life sucks because I'm waiting in line, it's perfectly fine to say, you know what? It's okay that I'm waiting in line. This is a part of life, and I'm waiting for something that's going to make it worth the wait. And I'm entirely free to be here. I choose to be here. I'm not a victim. You know what I mean? That's okay to make yourself feel good in a situation like that. You just don't want to divorce it from logic. And
I love what you're saying there is like, yeah, it's the story that I tell myself. And when Ryan first moved out here to LA, the story he was telling himself was like, wow, I'm stuck in traffic. This is awesome. And because LA is notorious for traffic. I actually don't think it's as bad as
people make it out.
Yeah, I mean,
it's bad, but like, you go to like Seattle or Chicago, like, it's just as bad or worse.
Drive down I-75 through Atlanta at 5 p.m.
Oh, Atlanta's tough, man.
Yeah, you drive down I-71 in Cincinnati at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Forget about it, man. It's the same thing as the 405. It's just fewer lanes. It's the same amount of traffic, though. You're going 0 miles an hour whether you're here or you're in Cincinnati.
I would even posit that, like, in a place like Cincinnati, I noticed this when I was there. There are very, like, everyone's in a hurry, very aggressive drivers, cutting people off. There's no consideration for the traffic around. Like, it is when you drive in a place like Cincinnati during rush hour, it is a me attitude. And if you don't have that me attitude, then you're not going to flow with traffic appropriately. Right. Where in LA, it is very much not a me attitude. Like, they're very tolerant. It's funny. Remember when we first came to California? I'm like, everyone's so nice here. And this lady, we were in the line at Chipotle, and this lady overheard me. She's like, no. She's like, we're just more tolerant here in California. She's like, we're not nice. Like, we just are more tolerant, with traffic and things like that. But yeah, it's that's just my way of saying, like, I'd rather be stuck in LA traffic than traffic in Chicago or traffic in Cincinnati or traffic in Atlanta. Like, I definitely would choose this. And I mean, just staying on the topic of positive attitudes, like, I still will find myself in traffic. I mean, I'll still, I mumble stuff every once in a while, like everyone does in traffic. Like, what are you doing? Yeah. There's like, I saw this meme of like the 5 things that everyone says in traffic. What the fuck are you doing? Why are you doing that? You cut me up. Anyway, so like, I will get into that sometimes, but by and large, 95% of the time, like, Mariah and I are in traffic the other day, and I'm like, look, we're doing it. We're in LA. We're so LA, Mariah. Look at us. Like, but it really does help me get through things. Like, that positive attitude helps me get through the negative feelings, that the visceral feelings that come up when I am stuck in traffic. And I think it's perfectly okay to like to kind of, I don't want to say lie to myself, because it's not necessarily a lie.
No,
but it is
definitely not.
But it is reframing. It's a perspective that I choose to have. And when I'm in traffic, if I choose to be pissed off because I'm in traffic, well, guess what? Like, I'm going to be pissed off. If I am sitting in traffic and I'm, choose a perspective of like, dude, I'm in Los Angeles. Like, how lucky am I to be able to live in LA and like experience this and be in this great weather, and at least it's nice outside. Like, that is going to help me get through traffic a little bit better. It
reminds me of back in Ohio, I was living in the suburbs, and so we were on like in this cul-de-sac neighborhood. And people would drive through there, and I'm sure the speed limit was probably 15 or 20 miles an hour. And I had a neighbor who would sit out, he's a retired guy, sit on his lawn chair and just yell at cars for several hours on the weekend. Like, as cars went by at 27 miles an hour, he would just yell, "Slow down, asshole!" over and over.
Wow.
I love this guy.
But this is the story he told himself, was like, people are going to speed, and I'm going to be the sort of justice or whatever, as opposed to actually doing something about it.
Right.
And so, is that positive thinking? Is that negative thinking on his part? I don't know what that was. It was almost like preemptive negative thinking. Like some bad stuff's about to happen today, and I'm going to be the arbiter of the bad things that are going to happen.
Yeah. You know, I really do think there is a sense in which we trap ourselves in a very unhealthy place when we spend too much time analyzing how positive our thoughts are or how negative our thoughts are. I think about C.S. Lewis, who said once that a person who tries to measure how quickly they're falling asleep is likely to remain awake all night. And I think the same is true for things like happiness. If you're analyzing, am I positive enough today? You know, was I 75%? Yesterday I was 65% positive. Today I'm 75%. I'm getting better. You're missing the whole point, right? It doesn't matter what kind of label we can slap on those thoughts. Oh, that was a negative one. Technically, Josh, that was negative. It doesn't even matter. The question that matters is, what are the results you most want to create in your life? Whether those results are internal, like I want to feel more peace, or I want more harmony in my relationships, or I want to be more physically healthy, or I want to maximize my athletic potential, whatever it may be, I want to cut down on my debt. Are your thoughts moving you towards that? Or are your thoughts constructive? Are they empowering? Or are they self-defeating? If they're self-defeating, I don't care if they're positive. You're negating your own life, right? And if they're tending towards health, it doesn't matter if they're so-called negative, because the goal isn't to win brownie points from society. It's not to have a brand of positivity. It doesn't matter if other people look at me as like, oh boy, TK's Mr. Happy, TK's Mr. Positive. If I'm miserable on the inside and my life isn't oriented around the results I create. And I also don't care if everyone looks at me as like, oh, TK's just negative all the time, if I'm just totally winning at life and crushing it. I'm happy in my marriage. I'm happy with my family. I'm getting along with my friends. I'm feeling healthy. Go ahead and think I'm negative, because that doesn't matter. It's not a societal game of like how positive or negative we are. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. I thought of, who said this recently? Was it, I feel like it was Andrew Schultz, but it probably wasn't. He said, someone said, we're all our own celebrities. We're all trying to be celebrities now. We all have social media, whatever.
Right.
Like we're all our own celebrities, and celebrities are the most miserable people in the world.
Yeah.
So we're all aspiring to be the most miserable people in the world, and we look to them. Because they can, Johnny Depp can put on a smile or whatever, and it's a beautiful smile, right? But and maybe Johnny Depp is eternally happy. I have no idea. Yeah. But I think that by and large, what we see is when people reach this level of adulation. Seth Godin just had a blog post this morning about this called Yes, 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 Yes. Yeah. And it was basically saying like, hey, yeah, you might get the yes, and it feels good at first, but it also means you have to show up, and you have to keep the promises that you've made. And if you switch one letter around, yes, 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 turns into eyes, 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 and all the eyes are on you. Right. Yeah. Because you've received the applause. So be careful what you ask for. And I think that whether it's Seth Godin or the celebrities or whatever we're talking about here, we have to be careful what we aspire toward as well. And I think sometimes we're aspiring toward someone else's idea of like what would be positive. You were positive thinking towards someone else's aspirations.
Yeah. You want to be positive thinking towards your own, man. Yeah. I think another thing too is it's important to say that what you feel is not a virtue or a vice, right? So feeling unhappy is not a sin. And feeling happy doesn't make you better than anyone else. And I think this is important because a lot of the pressure we put on ourselves to be positive comes from a place of feeling like our unhappiness is a sin, or it's evidence that we're doing something wrong. So if I wake up this morning and, everybody around me seems happy and I just kind of feel like, man, like I don't like my job or I don't like my life. We kind of put this pressure on ourselves like, well, I'm not the way I should be. I must be dysfunctional. I must be a loser. I must be a bad person. I must be an ungrateful person. I don't want to be one of those people. So I'm just going to make myself positive. Yeah, I'm just going to talk positively. But yeah, my job is just fine. I ought to be grateful. And so what we do is we end up trapping ourselves in a narrative that says, even though I don't feel grateful for my job, I believe that I ought to feel grateful, so I'm going to talk a game of gratitude and just sort of stuff that down in the name of trying to do the righteous thing. And I don't think that helps anybody either.
No.
I think being healthy, being constructive starts with the recognition that my feelings simply are what they are. I am not loved more or less by God or the universe because of what I feel. I am not better or worse than anyone else because of what I feel. It's about the response that I have to these feelings. It's about what I choose to do with them, the relationship that I choose to develop with them. It's kind of like the weather, man. It's like some days you'll wake up and you'll have hoped for a sunny day and it'll be rainy outside. Some days it'll be really cold. Some days it'll be really nice. And you don't always get to control that. There are things you can do to influence the way you feel, but you don't get to control the entire gamut of emotion. You will have some involuntary emotional experiences, and recognizing that that's okay, kind of relieves the pressure of feeling like, oh, I got to make myself feel something different than what I feel through positive thinking. No, you can simply allow yourself to be present to what you feel with a spirit of non-judgmental compassion, and sometimes be available to what that emotion is teaching you about life. Your jealousy, your fear might have something as valuable to offer you as your happiness.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you just said until you mentioned jealousy. I think jealousy is a wasted emotion, personally. I don't see the good that can come from jealousy, so maybe talk about that.
Yeah, so let's first make sure we're on the same page with one of the most important questions in the English language. What do you mean when you use that word?
Yeah, so I tend to delineate jealousy and envy, and I don't think either one of them are particularly useful. Yeah. I think jealousy is saying, I want what you have, and then envy is saying, you shouldn't have. No, other way around. Jealousy is you shouldn't have what you have. Envy is is the opposite. Yeah, I should get it and you shouldn't have it.
Yeah.
As a result. So envy is like one step further even, I suppose. I don't find that particularly useful. It's a famine mentality.
Yeah, okay. So I don't find it particularly enjoyable. I don't find it particularly inspiring. And maybe we should go ahead and concede the point and say it's not useful either. But I think attending to it, being honest about it, and being available to what it has to teach you can be a very constructive process.
It's a symptom of something that you need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you really have two options here. If you're feeling jealous, you can say, oh, well, Josh says this isn't very useful, so I'm going to pretend like I don't feel this, and I'm going to tell a different story. Or you can say, nope, as petty as it might be, as shameful as it might be, I'm really jealous of this guy. I wish I looked like he looked. I wish I had what he had, and it just hurts to know that. Okay, but you can be available to that, and this is a great opportunity for self-knowledge, for self-discovery. There has to be a way out of jealousy. I'm assuming that you guys are like me and that you felt jealous of other people before.
Sure.
I know I have, and the way out of that isn't denial. It isn't just, suppressing it and trying to make myself be positive. The way out of it is to use it as an opportunity to get to know myself and expand my understanding of the world. So maybe the emotion doesn't have to be regarded as useful. We can look at that as neutral. But the process of being available to what that emotion has to teach me can be useful.
Yeah, I think you're both saying the same thing. Is like ruminating in jealousy is pointless.
Right.
Like I think that's what you're saying when jealousy is a wasted emotion.
I really want to look like Jason Momoa. I could be 100% jealous about him.
Yeah.
It's never gonna happen. I don't have the Viking genes for that, right?
But that feeling is real, though. There are people who feel like that.
Yeah. Right, but thankfully I don't feel that. But let's say I did.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, how in what way is that going to be useful? I mean, eventually I'm going to have to just concede that I'm never going to do that. I really wish that I could, dunk like Karl Malone. Right? Never going to happen, right? I'm not
with that attitude.
So you give me a 9.5 foot rim when I'm 19, I was trouble.
I got you.
But let's look at that. Like, how is that useful? I just got to be Jason Momoa.
Right. So I concede that we can just say emotions are neither useful or useless, because I can find a positive emotion where you say, You can wake up in the morning and go, ooh, I look like Jason Momoa, and that feels good, right? Or you can say, oh man, I look so much better than Jason Momoa, and that feels good.
Though, like that would be to feel good would be okay. Like, you're making the case for delusion right now, which we can talk about positive thinking and the difference between positive thinking and delusion. You're making the case for delusion.
No. Okay, let me finish this point though.
Okay.
What I want to say is the positive feeling that you look better than Jason Momoa.
Yeah.
Isn't inherently useful. It's what you do with that. It's quite possible that waking up in the morning with that positive feeling could cause you to still be as much of a waste as the person who feels like they're uglier than Jason Momoa. I can't predict what your life is going to be and what your actions are going to be just by how positive your thought is or by how positive you feel. There are lots of people who feel very good about the way they look, and it leads them to behaving like an asshole towards others, right? And they still don't have love. They still don't have happy relationships. They still don't get the things they want. So I can't know anything just based on the thought that you're having. But to get to your question, how can it be useful in the way that we respond to it? Well, if you say, man, TK, I'm so depressed. And I say, why, man? And you say, well, I saw Jason Momoa and, I love the way the girls react to him, and I'm never going to get that. I'm never going to look like him. I said, what is it about that makes you unhappy? And now we began a process of Socratic dialogue where you begin to reveal yourself as a human being that is far more complex than the mere thought of, I don't look like Jason Momoa. Yeah. There are some philosophical layers there. There are some assumptions you're making about what's necessary to be happy, right? It's just like with minimalism. I don't have a Lambo, so I'm upset. Right. I don't have $1 million, so I'm upset. Well, there are some assumptions there, right? Like, I need this to be happy. Where did you get that belief from? Like, what is it about the way you're looking at the world that makes you feel convinced of that? Because there's a way that we can undermine those assumptions and open you up to a different point of view, right? Yeah. So I think most of us have had that kind of jealousy, and it's that very kind of Socratic thinking that's opened a way for us to get out of it. I don't think you can help anyone who feels jealous by just telling them, well, you're never going to look like Jason Momoa, so just deal with it, kid. I guess you can take the tough love approach, but I think it's far more profitable to say, why do you think you need to look like him?
Yeah, it's looking at the symptom and like unpacking the symptom of like, why is it that I feel that way? It's like, I think about John Mayer, and I could easily get jealous of like, man, I wish I could play guitar like John Mayer, and I'm jealous that I can't. And then I can unpack that symptom and be like, why am I jealous? Well, it's because I really want to be talented at something. And I probably could if I put in, the 10,000 hours or whatever it is. Right. I could maybe get close to as good as he is. Maybe I'll never be what he is, but I could certainly get closer to that end of the spectrum. Well, then the question comes up is like, well, like, A, do I have the time? And if I do have the time, am I willing to invest that time? So, I do see what you're saying, TK. Like, just recognizing that symptom and then unpacking that can help you either one or the other. It'll help you like accept the way things are, or it'll give you some motivation to move forward. We have some questions from our audience, but first, actually, TK sent me some questions, some jump-off points here, and I really like this one. You said, is the self-help industry just a bunch of fluff? How can you know which ideas work? How do you know who to listen to when the gurus contradict each other? What self-help philosophies and thinkers do you like? A lot to unpack there, but is the self-help industry just a bunch of fluff? Oh, man. Can be. I think it can be. I mean, like, self-help is a lot of times, like, it's a pejorative to a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? And that's unfortunate because, like, and I think this new word that's come out, self-care, which means effectively the same thing, right? Yeah. It's a rebranding. Reframing, yeah. And it's just like, I think maybe I heard TK talk about this actually. When there are words that were once considered to be like a common term, but they're now like a racist term or a sexist term, right? Because as language changes, the things we get offended by will change, right? My brother's black, and I remember like this is in the 90s. We worked at the same restaurant together. Someone called him African American. He said, "Man, don't call me that. I've never been to Africa." Like for him, that was offensive. Like it was more like he just wanted to also mess with white people too because like they were uncomfortable. But like the terminology tends to change over time, and I think that's what's happening now with self-help. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe
like 10 years ago, it would have been okay for Ryan to say, I'm bringing a little color to the show. Today, that's unacceptable.
Oh, man. Never going to live that down. So, yeah, what do you think about the self-help industry, TK?
Oh, man. So I agree with what both of you guys are saying. It's kind of tough because nowadays you'll read books that are not categorized as self-help, and they'll spend the first 2 chapters explaining why I'm not a motivational speaker, why I'm not self-help, because they know people have so much resistance about those labels. And then you read it, and it's all just like insights on how you can help yourself reduce your debt, insights on how you can help yourself live a healthier life. And I'm like, wait, isn't the term self-help, isn't that the least controversial term we could come up with? Yeah. You are helping yourself using the stories and the conceptual tools that other people write about. But I get it. I'm not naive. I understand. A lot of people's experience of self-help, for whatever reason, even though it differs from mine, is that of reading books that make really large promises about how everything's just going to be amazing after you apply this one, one master technique. And it does, and life is very nuanced.
Right.
And there's no single book that's going to save your life. There's no single technique that's going to make your life better when you divorce it from critical thinking and creative thinking. And so I think the self-help industry has caused a lot of people to end up feeling disappointed that the promises of these books haven't been fulfilled. And
you ever read anything from David Foster Wallace?
I haven't. I only saw that one video, This Is Water, but I haven't actually read any of his books.
Right. That's like his most popular thing. But I mean, his writing is. This is our David Foster Wallace segment of the podcast. He wrote an essay called "How Tracy Alston Broke My Heart." Tracy Alston was like this tennis prodigy back in, I think, the 80s. Do you remember Tracy Alston at all? But like she was competing at a professional level in like at 16 years old. It was unbelievable. And eventually got hurt and whatever. She wrote a memoir, right? And the essay wasn't actually about her. It was about how sports biographies always disappoint us because we try to take athletic genius, a LeBron James, a Karl Malone. I could name dozens of other basketball players.
We were talking about geniuses.
Okay.
Burn.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would obviously call Michael Jordan a athletic genius, but then we try to translate that into the written word. And what this essay, the thesis of this essay was like, wow. If you try to do that, you try to take this thing that is actually amorphous and just really hard to contextualize because it has to do with physicality, and you put it in the written word, it's always going to disappoint you. And I don't think that's the same thing with self-help, but when we go to self-help looking for the answer.
That's I think why it has such a bad rep, is because you do have people who do say, hey, use this one technique and you're going to live the best life possible. Well, guess what? When you apply that technique and it doesn't work, you're like, you feel betrayed. Like someone lied to me.
I think that's why Dave Ramsey works so well. This is one of the few self-help areas where there is a definitive answer. And people might disagree with the few nuances in there, but ultimately they're like, that snowball works 100% of the time it's applied.
Right.
Yeah, the 7 baby steps works 100% of the time it's applied.
And Dave Ramsey is very no fluff, right? He will tell you if it's going to be tough. He will tell you if it's going to take a long time.
Yes.
He'll say this is going to make you better, but this is like a multi-year process. This isn't some kind of like get rich quick scheme. He's very honest about that. And a lot of the marketing that's required in self-help industry to get people to buy the book, sometimes it does overpromise and underdeliver. But here are 2 things I'd say about it. Number 1, I would say that all forms of learning are self-help. That education is by its very nature a process of self-improvement. So if you're studying physics, if you're studying economics, if you're studying anthropology, if you're studying political philosophy, anytime you are expanding your understanding of how the world works, you are increasing your level of personal power and giving yourself a greater opportunity for self-mastery. So I don't limit myself to what's in the self-help section, but I also don't exclude what's there out of any kind of prejudice. wherever there are human beings speaking in a way that sounds interesting to me, I don't care about their label. I want to learn. So I don't have anything going on where I'm like, oh, Tim Ferriss, he's a self-help guy. No, man, if Tim Ferriss is saying something and it's helping me, I just want ideas. I just want good ideas. You know, if Tony Robbins is saying something and it's useful to me, I just want good ideas. You know, right. I don't care how the person looks. I don't care if they're cheesy. I don't care what their brand is. I care about me and my own journey towards self-actualization. And I think the best way to study, the best way to read is to do so in a self-interested manner. The second thing I'll say, oh, shoot, I forgot this thought. Ah, man.
It's all right, man.
Shoot, I said everything is self-help.
You could tweet that, by the way. When he talked about all all learning is self-help.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll add to that is we labels are important, right? Labels shouldn't be held too tightly, right? We have to have labels.
This is a microphone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a label for it, right?
You can't go to the store and ask for something that doesn't have a label. Can you point me in the direction of...
Hey, what are you guys here for? Oh, man, I don't like to put labels on anything.
Right.
Is this a self-help podcast?
Sure.
I mean, it can be.
Because I would consider it that. I mean, you guys are offering stories and insights that can help people.
I mean, so we wrote 3 books, right? And the way I define them is to put a label on them, right? Is Essential is an essay collection, right? It's probably a self-help essay collection, if we're being honest. Minimalism is a self-help book. I just say, yes, it's a self-help book.
Sure.
Yep.
And I say, Everything That Remains is a memoir, but it's probably a self-help memoir as well. And I'm okay with that term, though. But I agree with you. There's so many people who have, it's like, because the barrier of entry is so low, like anyone can provide help, but how useful is their help is the question. And now we're also in this age, you've seen this, where everyone is creating content. And we had Nate Green on the podcast, and he talked about, I think his quote was, speak only when it adds more value than silence. And man, like that's powerful, right? Because quite often we just feel like I have to fill the space, although sometimes that space would be a lot more valuable than what is said in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't...
No, Ryan stepped on it.
I ruined it.
All right, we got a question here from Helen. Helen says, is it okay to wallow in sadness or anger? Sometimes I think that positive thinking while not feeling positive is bottling up my emotions.
Man, I don't think it's ever good to wallow in the negative feelings. It's, again, like the negative feelings are a symptom. The anger is a symptom. The depression is a symptom. I think those need to be recognized. But like to sit there and just... wallow in self-pity is I don't think that's useful personally.
No, and I think it can turn into a downward spiral. I mean, like I said, and thankfully this is on Patreon. This is not stuff I would talk about in public generally, but this past week's first time in my life I've had suicidal thoughts. And I tend not to be a emotive person. Like the last time I cried legitimately, like broke down and cried, was when my mom died a decade ago. And it's not that I think crying is wrong. I think it's very beneficial. It's not a natural response for me.
Right.
But I could not stop crying this week. Like I had to lock myself in the bathroom. I was just like sitting on the floor, just uncontrollably. And wallowing in that though could only lead to one place, right? Like it's the first time over the last 9 months there have been times where I'm like, man, I wish I wouldn't have woken up today. That's not suicidal, but there have been moments where it's just been like, I need to end this all. Like this is too much suffering. And I need this to be over. But if I wallow in it, it's probably going to lead to that. And so it's finding a way out, but also not, I don't want to sugarcoat and say everything's great. Right, but I do want to. I want to acknowledge how I got there, but I need to find a way out of it. And wallowing is not the answer.
Yeah, no. I agree. I would say it is okay for you to process those feelings and to take as much time as you need to process them. It is okay for you to be honest with yourself and others about how you feel. It is okay for you to take longer than what the people in your life think you need to process them. It's okay for you to seek any help from anybody that you find helpful. It's okay to be curious about those feelings. It's okay to inquire into them. It's okay to use them as a tool for self-discovery. It's okay to talk to a therapist if that's something that you're open to and you feel is helpful. It's okay to simply feel those feelings and not force them out of your system overnight. That is absolutely okay. I think the reason that we take issue with the word wallow is not because we're trying to be the semantic cops and arrest you for using that word. It's because that sort of implies that I'm going to accept this as my final state, and I'm not going to be open to the possibility that this feeling is going to move me in a direction that leads me beyond it. Don't accept any feeling as the final state. Even the good ones that you have,
right?
Because all of those feelings will subside, and in many ways they are like the seasons; they come and go in different cycles. But as long as you are in that feeling, give yourself the permission to accept that as okay for you to feel, and process that in whatever way works for you.
Yeah, it's sometimes too, like when I get really down for whatever reason, sometimes I will take a moment to like really honestly appreciate the fact that I even have the ability to feel, because I'd rather feel pain than nothing at all. I mean, personally, I'm sure it's different for a lot of people, but I know that like sometimes like going through those emotions, like, yeah, we can learn from it. And you don't want to stuff stuff down, because like you try to like ignore those emotions. It just comes back stronger in different ways, especially like you try to drink it away or do some drugs to push it away, like it's just going to come back even stronger. But yeah, like I was having this conversation with Mariah this morning. She was having a rough time, and I'm like, I was like, our podcast today is about positive thinking, and like I don't think that fixes everything, but being able to like appreciate the fact that you have this human experience, also understanding that the human experience, it's like it's heaven and it's hell. Like it's like I think that if hell exists, like this actually might be it, man. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit, because we have someone like Rob Bell who's been on our podcast, and we had quite a few Christians. I don't know, TK, you're son of a pastor, right?
Son of a preacher, man.
Okay, yeah. But my first thought goes to so Ryan and I grew up religious, right? Ryan, Jehovah's Witness. I grew up Catholic, and very religious parents. Mm-hmm. But there are times where I kind of think of prayer as almost like positive thinking in a way, but it can lead to like it can have the same sort of delusional positive thinking. We're asking the universe to give me this thing.
So what you're saying is relying on prayer alone is kind of like relying on positive thinking alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like relying on the secret or whatever, right?
Well, it's funny because prayer, though, if like going back to the whoop, like that's what's your wish? Like that's the first step. I get that.
Tweet that podcast,
right?
Sean.
We'll link to the song.
Who's that? 95 South?
Oh my God.
I'm gonna pretend not to know.
But like that's the first step in whoop. It's like, what is your wish? What do you want? I mean, and it's. I do think that step is important. Like you do got to have Hail Mary. Like I mean, it's okay to throw a Hail Mary out there. Like it's not. But if you're just relying on the Hail Mary, like that's
prayer is. Like
well, Hail Mary is literally a prayer.
Right. That is true.
That's why the play is called a Hail Mary.
I know. And my mom kept rosary beads on her at all times and said the rosary every single like. She had calluses on these two fingers because she would go through the rosary beads, right? Mm-hmm. And in doing that, like, yeah, she would do the Hail Marys, and that to me is more of that's like transcendental meditation, right? Like when you're going through that same prayer over. There was 60 beads on a rosary bead, I think. And she just keep going through it over and over. That's similar to having a mantra, and whatever your mantra is. Big blue book or something, you're like saying it over and over and over, like it seems really similar. But our friend Adam Dressler, who just wrote a book, I think it's called "This Is How We Pray," and it's he's a pastor at a really big church in Tennessee, and I'm reading that, and his is much different from that. Like my mom's was a meditative sort of experience. But what about prayer for you, TK? I've never heard you talk about religion, but I know you have your set of beliefs. What are you comfortable talking about with our small Patreon audience here?
Always comfortable talking about anything that comes up. So there's a very excellent book by Brother Lawrence called The Practice of the Presence of God. And in that book, he delivers an understanding of prayer as the art of cultivating a consciousness of the divine omnipresence, meaning that God is present in and through everything and everyone, and prayer is simply anything that we do that awakens our understanding to this reality. This is echoed in another book, Anthony DeMello, called Sadhana. And in that book, he begins with the premise that prayer can and should be fun, and that any act can be prayer as long as you are coming to attention, right? You also see this echoed in Teresa Avila's Interior Castle. There's a verse in the Bible that instructs people to pray without ceasing. Now, if you think about that in a literal sense, that's kind of impossible because you can't be engaged in an act of prayer as traditionally understood at every single moment of your life. You have to sleep. You have to drive a car. You can't always be, making the sign of the cross or holding your rosary beads or saying a Hail Mary.
Can't record a podcast if you're praying. Right.
Right. But the idea of praying without ceasing means that you are in a state of mindfulness.
You're
right?
noticing the world around you.
Yeah.
For me, the most sort of euphoric state is often, for me, is when I'm writing, because real writing is just noticing and then focusing what you've noticed into the words on the page, right?
Absolutely. So we often conflate the distinction between prayer as a practice and specific forms of prayer as techniques. And there are a whole bunch of different forms of prayer throughout the history of religion, even in the Christian tradition alone. So the Hail Mary is a kind of prayer, but that's different from the Our Father. Right. And both of those belong within a specific category of prayer, right? And there are different categories of prayer and different examples of prayer. The Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius, for instance, is an entire book on different kinds of prayer, or the Anthony DeMello book on Sadhana. Every single chapter is a kind of prayer. There is even a kind of prayer that simply involves being attentive to the inflow and outflow of breath and recognizing that too is the circulation of the divine, right? There are all these different types of prayer. So I think just like with positivity, you have to make a distinction between positive psychology, which is this field where lots of people disagree, there's lots of diversity, there's no single monolithic conclusion, and the easy to pick on idea that says you should only think about what makes you feel good. You have to do that same thing with prayer. Prayer is this old ancient tradition that has transformed many people's lives and has been used in many different ways across cultures and religious traditions. And then there's prayer as we have been taught, which is shut your eyes really tightly, close your hands, right, and do petitionary prayer, where you treat God as Santa Claus and you list out specific things that you want and you say, God, give me these things and give me these things.
Right.
That is one form of prayer.
Help me win,
but that's not the only kind.
Help me win the game. And
help me win the game.
Give me the nice car and the bigger house.
Right.
Yeah.
Please. And and I think that's a good point. There's noticing versus as you said, petitioning. I often think that we turn to prayer in the darkest moments, not in the appreciative moments, right? Where it's like, wow, this is all going great. Must be because I'm awesome.
Right.
But this is all going terrible. Must be because God hasn't helped me out, right?
Right.
So I just need some help, God.
It's interesting you put that perspective on it, because I do pray, but I don't ask for stuff anymore. It's to show gratitude. It might be to help myself focus on what it is that I want to incorporate into my life, whether it's I don't know, man, wanting to live a healthier lifestyle, and I will voice my want, but it's not asking, I don't it's not like, hey, program me, go inside my brain and program me. It's more about hey, thanks for giving me the opportunity to change these things. But that's how I look at prayer. But I guess it's another way. It's a long way of saying, for me, prayer is it used to be this, yes, give me, help me. And now it's a like gratitude practice that I have. And it's like the things that I do want. Yeah, I mean, if there was a Santa Claus that I could ask stuff for, like, I guess maybe I would ask for stuff. But really, like the wants that I have, I just put myself in God's shoes. And like, if I was God, I would want me to do it myself. Like I would want me to like put as much effort into it, and like for me to go through the struggle, for me to not just have things handed to me. So
I even notice that with parenting now. Like with Ella, it'd be much easier for me to make her bed in the morning than coaching her through it repeatedly, right? Or like whatever it is. It's like I could say, just give me it, I'll do it, right? But what's that going to do? It's going to just enable her to keep asking Santa Claus to do the thing for her, right? And just like this weekend, she was doing something with a little tablet that she has, and she was like, come over here and help me with it. I'm like, no, you come over here and I will help you with it if I'm not doing something right now, right? I'm going to help you figure it out. I'm not going to come over there and fix everything for you.
So there's a very interesting Bible story that mirrors that. So there's a story of Jesus and the disciples on the boat. And there's a great storm, and it causes the disciples to fear for their lives. Jesus is sleeping on the boat, according to the story, and the disciples run to him, and they wake him up, and they say, Jesus, we fear for our lives. We're going to die. Save us. And Jesus' response is very interesting. Based on religious stereotypes alone, what you would expect from Jesus is for him to say something like, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have come to your God in a time of great distress, and you have made a request of me. Allow me to help you out. But that's not what he says. He rebukes them and says, O ye of little faith, how long must I tarry with thee? Then he addresses the wind and the waves, and he says, peace be still, and the storm ceases. And then they say, what manner of man is this that even the wind and the seas obey him? And whenever you hear that preached about or talked about, usually the emphasis is on how powerful Jesus was by making the storm cease. But we kind of overlook the fact that he rebuked his own followers when they reacted to a crisis by running to him and begging him to save them. He responded to them as if it were his will for them to develop their own potential to do something about it. In the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition, one of the words that's used for salvation is theosis, which means God becoming. And it follows the pattern of one of the early church fathers who said God became man so that man might become God. And the notion there is the goal of prayer is self-actualization. It's divinization, right? That the goal of prayer is to not increase this sense of dependency that causes us to constantly make petitions. Save me, give me. It's to increase that sense of independency where we sort of reclaim our understanding of what it means to be made in the image and likeness of the Creator, where we awaken to our own creative power, our own creative potential, and we can fulfill the command that was given in Genesis, where God creates the world and says, I'm going to stop now. I'm handing the project over to you. Be fruitful and multiply. Take this world and make it more than what it was when I gave it to you. You know, that's the goal of prayer. And so the economist Thomas Sowell says about economic policies that you should judge policies not by the intentions behind them, but by the actual outcomes they produce. So I don't care if you say I'm supporting this policy because it helps the poor. I want to know, does it actually help the poor, or does it make their lives worse? I think the same is true of prayer. It's not just about the intentions, it's about the outcome. Are your prayers, whatever kind you're saying, are they putting you in contact with that within you that knows itself as a source of creative power? If so, that's prayer. If not, that's just going through the motions. And you are guilty of what the Apostle Paul said, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. It's empty religion, you know? But true prayer awakens the spirit to your potential.
Well said, man. That's spot on.
So yeah, I believe in it. C.S. Lewis says prayer doesn't change God, but it changes me, right?
Yeah.
Danny says, what's the best way to seek critical feedback without sacrificing positive thoughts? There are two interesting words that stand out to me here.
Can you repeat it?
Danny says, what's the best way to seek critical feedback without sacrificing positive thoughts? So if I were to rephrase it, I would say, how do I get feedback? Because critical feedback, I look at criticism and feedback as two different things.
Yes.
That's how I delineate it, right? And it's the reason that I don't go on Instagram and check the comments anymore. And we have someone to do that because I don't know this person. Who was it that said what they think about me is none of my business? And that's sort of how I feel about social media. Like,
me too.
What they think of me is none of my business. The only place I look at comments right now, I look at two places. One is my personal mentions on Twitter. Or on Patreon. Now, Patreon, people have a stake in the game. There's a bit of a paywall there, and so like the people on Patreon, they're like they get it. We can disagree with each other. I can get really good feedback from those people because I've accepted them into my world.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with the 5 people in this room, right? Like I can go to TK and say, "Hey, TK, can you give me feedback about this?" Because I trust him. And as opposed to just sending out a PDF to the world and saying, "Hey, give me criticism on this," because be careful what you ask for; you're going to get it.
Yeah,
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think feedback is important because like looking at your own creations or your own practices, whatever it is, through your own lens, like that's a fault. I feel like you've got to have someone you can trust to be like, "Hey, tell me what this looks like from the outside in." But with the criticism, it's like you just have to ignore that stuff, man, because criticism is there to tear you down. It's the feedback builds you up where criticism tears you down.
Right. Well, and I think that criticism shows you the problem. Feedback shows you the problem with a solution, or at least a proposed solution.
But
right?
even sometimes criticism shows you a problem that really isn't a problem, though.
Right. It shows you a problem, right?
I see.
And it's a perceived problem most of the time. Most of our problems are perceived problems.
Yeah.
They're not actual problems.
Sure.
And so you can have someone say, "Here's a problem." They're really saying that's my problem. I'm projecting that onto you. Judgment is but a mirror that reflects the insecurities of the person who's doing the judging.
Yeah.
And the criticism tells me a lot more about the critic than it tells me about what they're critiquing. Yeah. You can tweet that podcast, Sean.
Yeah, it's good. So to answer that question head on, it's like you've got to be able to differentiate between feedback and criticism.
I think you have to seek feedback, and you have to find ways to filter out criticism. Is the way because it's not simply ignoring it. Because once it's there on your doorstep, it's really hard to ignore. But if you can filter it out, the way I filter it out is I don't look at the mentions, because every time I do, I regret it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I'll say too is it's important to contextualize, because a good skeptic could ask the following: well, should you ignore feedback just because it makes you feel bad? This goes back to our discussion on positive thinking. Maybe someone is being a jerk, but they're telling you something that you need to hear. And even though it feels really bad, you should look at those mentions, or you should look at those YouTube comments. So how do you know? And this is where I think contextualization comes in. The first question you've got to ask yourself is, what are my goals? What's the point of even being involved in a process of paying attention to feedback? Isaac Morehouse says it this way. He says, decide who you want to be a hero for and ignore everyone else, right? Because only you can know the answer to that question. So let's say I listen to your podcast and I go, "Oh, Josh, I think you could do a little bit more of this and a little bit less of that. Maybe I'm right about some things, maybe I'm wrong about some things," but it doesn't really matter until we know what your goals are, right? Why would you even care about feedback in the first place? Because your goals are going to help you determine what is useful and what is not. And I would say separate people's motives from your own self-interest. At the end of the day, when someone says something to you, either it's useful to you and helping you create the results you want to create, or it's not. And if it's useful, it doesn't even matter if they're a jerk. Be way too selfish about what you're trying to get out of it. Be way too selfish about your ability to learn, to be distracted by how much of a jerk they are. And if someone's being nice to you and they're telling you kind things like, "You look better than Jason Momoa," that's not useful. Doesn't even matter that their motives are great and that they're saying something that makes you feel good. That's not useful. Move on. Take what's useful.
You're never as bad as they say you are. You're never as good as they say you are.
That's true.
And I think if your objective is to get a drink of water, the worst place to go is to the waterfall. And you could tweet that too, Sean. But that's what social media has turned into.
Oh, yeah.
It has become this waterfall, and it's like I'm gonna drown underneath this thing, and where I can just go downstream a little bit, and the people I trust, where it's calm, and by the way, Ryan gives me more critical feedback than anyone that I know. because I ask for it from him, right?
Yeah.
And also I trust him, right? He's not going to come to me and say, your shoelaces are stupid or whatever.
Right.
But I'm going to find that on whatever, Instagram. Yeah. Let's move on to Green Boarding Pass. Ask a question here. This is our last question for the Maximal. What's the best solution to racism? Now, I included this here because TK has done 4 episodes with Steve Patterson about race, and you two had disagreements about it, different points of view. I think ultimately you have similar values, if not the same exact values. But man, we talk about nuance. There's a simple answer: stop being racist.
Right.
That's the solution to racism.
Yeah.
But that's like telling water not to be wet.
Man, what a tough question. Like there is, I mean, that's kind of like in its own right, like looking for a magic, positive thinking is this magic bullet answer. That question is like looking for this magic bullet answer, and I don't think there's just one thing that you can do to create, to stop racism. Like there's a lot of things. I think that it's a amalgamation of many things.
Well, I think about there are clearly racists out there, right?
Sure.
And
so we kill all the racists. That's how we end racism.
No, it's actually not, because we're always going to be tribal, right?
Right.
And so racism will be supplanted by sexism, or it will be supplanted by, and there's good tribalism, obviously, right? Seth Godin talks about tribes, or TK's tribe is Chicago Bulls. How's that working out for you lately? There's there are these tribes, but then there's this sort of identity tribe where it's like I'm so tied up into this, and we let it either make or break our entire day. I heard someone talking about this recently. I think it was Duncan Trussell. He was talking about, I saw someone who was on Instagram, and they were at the Grand Canyon or something beautiful and stunning. He said, look, I'm at this beautiful place, but I can't enjoy it because Donald Trump is president. And it's like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You can't enjoy that because and the same thing with racism is I can't enjoy my life because I know there are racists out there. And I think that it obviously sucks, but I'd love to hear TK's thoughts, because I can wax poetic only so long on a subject like this.
Yeah, I mean, we need an entire episode on this just to get started. But so first, let's get into the semantics, because I do think it's important, because not everyone means the same thing when they say racism, right? And I want to make sure we don't disagree on things that we actually agree about just because of words. So sometimes when people use the word racism, what they mean is simply racial prejudice. So a person is a racist under this definition if they harbor negative discriminatory attitudes towards someone just based on race alone. Even if that person has no power, no clout, no influence, if they have the attitude, they are a racist. Another definition of racism, or another manner in which it is used, is that it's the combination of prejudice plus power, right? That it's not only the harboring of these negative attitudes, but that attitude is combined with economic and political power, so you have the ability to make someone else's life difficult, right? So those are two different kinds of forces we deal with. If we're just dealing with the attitude of racial prejudice, then we have to defeat that just like we deal with any other attitude. We answer that same question in the same way of, how do we deal with greed? Now that's still just as difficult of a question, but we deal with that through a combination of education and the embodiment of virtue in our own individual lives. We take personal responsibility as individuals to embody the virtues that we believe in and to educate others towards those virtues by living by example. And we play the long game, understanding that winning the battle of the inner kingdom, winning the battle for human hearts, is a long battle. It's an arduous battle. It's been fought for centuries and centuries and centuries, and you've got to be truly devoted to it. When it comes to the other part, though, how do we deal with racism as these attitudes plus economic and political power? Then that is kind of a political battle. And we have to take a look at how certain policies and practices affect groups of people independently of our intentions. because it's possible to not consciously subscribe to negative attitudes, but to support policies and practices that have a disproportionate impact on people of certain demographics. And here is where I side with Milton Friedman, who said, the goal is not to find a system that relies on a good person. The goal is to have a system that incentivizes even the bad person to do the right thing. So when we find ourselves in a situation where, because a certain person becomes president, and we say, oh no, all hope is lost because we need a good guy in the system, that's evidence that we have a terrible system. Not just for allowing that person to be in power, but because we have a system that relies on a good man. And if there are any guarantees in life, it's this. Before you die, if you're lucky to live long enough, you're going to have at least one or two people occupying offices that are important to you that you don't like, who disagree with everything that matters to you, right? So I'm a major proponent in my political philosophy of systems that incentivize the bad person to do the right thing. The reason I think racism is such a powerful force in our world isn't because there are prejudiced people alone, but because many people who are prejudiced have the power to inflict violence upon those that they are prejudiced against without accountability, which is why I loved Pete's response so much when he called for the independent investigation, right? When it came to
Talk about Pete Buttigieg here.
Yeah. Which is why I love that response so much. And so I think the way that you know, for instance, it's possible to have a negative attitude towards someone based on race, but to have no power to impact that person's life. Okay. I think that's a rather weak force that's relatively easy to deal with. The difficult thing to deal with.
Hold on. Let's talk about that real quick. So to me, I think when you say education, I think of the best education as immersion. I think you tend to agree with that. That's the sort of praxis philosophy in a nutshell, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think quite often people are prejudiced toward others because they don't understand the group, right? And when you see people, you know, it's like, who's the guy who like went out and converted a bunch of Ku Klux Klan members? Like,
I know you're talking about
immersed
the black guy.
Yeah,
just befriended a lot of people.
And they're like, well, I can't hate
approach.
you, right? Like, we were talking about this last night. Like, if you want to de-escalate a situation with someone, or that you think you're going to get into a fight with, loan them a book, because all of a sudden psychologically you have, or you can loan them a spatula, a cup of sugar, whatever. You think, I must like this person if I just gave them something,
right? And
it creates this cognitive dissonance in a way, right? And I think the same is true with we live in a relatively segregated country, right?
Yeah.
We're from Dayton, Ohio. It's east side is white, west side is black. That's just the way that it is there, right? And there's some overlap, but very little. And when that happens, like you see these segregated communities where people tend to look like each other, and the other community literally becomes the other, right? And you even say it's the west side or it's the east side or whatever, right?
But see, I don't think that's merely an attitudinal problem. I don't think the world is that way because there are some people who say, oh, we want those people to live over there while we get to live over here. In fact, that attitude is a very weak attitude that's really easy to overcome. The reason the world is that way is because there are specific political policies in practice that not only incentivize people to be that way, but punish people for being otherwise.
Give me an example.
One example of this would be the public school system. It is illegal if you grow up in Compton to go to school in Beverly Hills. It's not just that the people in Beverly Hills are like, hey, you can't come to our public school because we don't want you because you're one of the poor people from Compton. No, like you actually would get arrested, okay, if you live in Compton and you try to put your child in Beverly Hills. That's a political matter, right? And there are many things like this. So when most people talk about racism as a problem that's hurting our world, they're not just saying, hey, there are people out there that are hurting my feelings because they don't like black people or Asian people or white people. Yeah, that's a reality and that does exist. But the reason this discussion gets so volatile is because people are addressing something that is systemic. People are addressing a system that says, if you come from a certain background, okay, we're going to make it illegal for you to be able to do the kinds of things that you need to do or you would want to do in order to try to create the life that you live.
And certain
those
people are disproportionately affected by that. It's not just you're not saying black kids from Compton can't go there. You're saying anyone from Compton can't go to Beverly Hills. But guess what?
And by the way, I believe the most powerful forms of racism, if you will, are not the attitudinal forms. They're the ones that are built into the way systems affect people, right? So let's say I'm the kind of guy who, at the level of my conscious thinking, I say I love women. I love women. I have a great relationship with my mom, a great relationship with my wife. Women are totally cool, and all the women that I know love me, right? But let's also say I'm in a position of power where it just so happens, and let's just say I'm totally clueless about it because I'm not even aware of it. Right. It just so happens I'm constantly making decisions that are just crushing women in the marketplace, right? That are just making their lives difficult. I think that's even worse, right? Because I still get to think I'm a good guy. I still get to feel great about the fact that I have all the right beliefs. It's sort of like religion. It's like the person who is a total asshole to everyone in their lives, but they go to church every Sunday, right? And they have all the right beliefs. Yeah. They say the creeds.
They're checking the boxes.
They're checking the boxes, right? That person is actually worse than the one that just totally owns it and is like, nah, I don't believe in God. I think that's a worst time. I think that's a waste of time. I'd rather have that guy on my team than the person that's going to screw me over at every turn, but feel good about themselves because they go to church every Sunday, right? So I don't think the most powerful and prevalent forms of racism in this world stem from people having the wrong consciously held beliefs, because we live at a time where most people are incentivized to say the right things, right? Most people are incentivized to say and believe the right things. But where the problems come from are these kinds of policies. And that's just one example where it's hard to talk about it because the conversations usually diverge into, well, I'm not a racist. I got a black dog and a black friend or whatever it may be, right? It's like, hey, man, nobody cares, right? We're not talking about you as an individual and how good you feel in your heart. We're talking about these specific policies, and we got to look at how they're affecting people. I think ultimately
we're talking about both. I mean, and that's why you brought it up, right? Like we are talking about both.
Yeah, for sure.
Because at the same time, like you don't want to be friends with someone who has negative intentions as well, right? Like if their intentions are bad, intentions do matter. They definitely matter. Okay, so if we're both standing in my kitchen, right, we're making dinner together, right?
Yeah.
And I accidentally turn around and cut you with a knife across the arm, right? And oh my God, I'm so sorry. Let me help out with that or whatever, right?
Sure.
Or if I just turn around, I slice you in the arm real quick with a knife, like. It's the same exact thing. The same outcome has happened. But for the second bit, I should go to jail for a long time for that, right? For the first bit, I probably should have no punishment whatsoever other than like your own sort of scorn and I should ask for forgiveness, basically.
So I agree with that. But now you have pressed me to make a further distinction. So I would separate intentions, which is what you are trying to do, from emotions, which is what you feel or how you feel about me, right? And I don't think emotions equal ethics. So just because you have positive feelings towards me, it doesn't mean you have positive intentions toward me. So a great example of this in the context of race is take the movie Get Out, where the people who were most dangerous towards black people were actually the people who liked black people the most.
Yes.
Right? They were super friendly towards black people. They were happy when black people came around. And yet, in a different sense, they were the most dangerous. Right? In one of the first scenes in that movie, you see the white cop pull over the couple. And the way they're painting the picture, the implication is that the cop is like a racist guy. You know, the black dude isn't even driving and he wants to see his license. And they're kind of setting you up for the racial tension you're going to experience throughout the movie. But the implication is that the cop is a racist, okay? Yeah. But what's interesting about it is the cop was less dangerous to him than the girl he was dating who loved black guys.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to be careful with giving people an out just because they have positive thoughts, because one of the most dangerous people in the movie said, "Oh, I love Obama. If I could have elected him a third time, I would have put him in office," right? And he was the most dangerous guy towards black people. Yeah. So I think the most important question is, how are you committed to treating other human beings? I talk about this in my conversation, I believe I did, with Steve Patterson, but there's a moment in August Wilson's play Fences, which there's a movie now with Denzel Washington, actually. And there's a moment where the father and the son are having a conversation, and the son is very upset with his dad and accuses his dad of not liking him. And so the dad drills him with a series of questions. He says, "Is there always food on the table?" Son says, "Yes." "Do you have a bed to sleep in?" "Yes." "Do you have a roof over your head?" "Yes." And he just like drills him on all these questions. "Yes, yes, yes." And the dad says, "Why do you think that is?" And the son says, "Because you like me?" And the dad says, "Because I like you." No. And then he gives him this speech. He says, "It's because I'm a man, and it's because I'm committed to doing what's right. I'm committed to living accordance with my principles." And he says, and that's what you need to worry about. Instead of going around worrying about who likes you and who doesn't like you, you need to ask yourself, who's doing right by you? So when it comes to who I choose to be friends with, I care about who does right by me. I don't care about what you say in terms of how much I love black people, or how much I love Praxis, or how much I love the Chicago Bulls. Will you do right by me?
Because that includes a whole bunch of ingredients.
Yeah, and some of the most dangerous freaking people in this world are people that have very flattering beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Did you see Us? The follow-up?
I didn't see Us.
Okay,
I didn't see it.
I was looking for commentary on that because it lost me quite a bit. But I mean, it was more of a commentary on. Did you see Us?
Mm-mm.
It's the follow-up to Get Out, essentially, Jordan Peele's second film.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and
he came out with it's a sequel?
No, not really. No,
okay.
No, it doesn't even occur in the same universe. But like, it's
it still deals with
it deals with class more so than race. I mean, it's a predominantly black cast, but it deals with. I really love that he took the dad role and did the opposite of what a lot of films try to do. They created right now the dad is the black equivalent of Al Bundy basically in the film, right? Yeah. Like, but a smart version, right? But and so like it's like the goofy character, right, which is almost always exclusively reserved for the Al Bundy types, the middle-aged white men. And I love what he did with the film, and then created this whole idea of class and this underclass, and it kind of went off the rails for me. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but we'll have to talk about it on a future podcast then, because I'd love.
Oh man, I gotta watch it.
Yeah. It was not Get Out, because Get Out to me is like a classic film. I thought Get Out was phenomenal, but it left me thinking about a lot, at least about class and classism and attitudes toward people, violent uprisings, like all of these things.
I gotta dig into that. We should talk about it. I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a horror movie connoisseur.
Okay,
I believe there's so much great philosophical insight in
horror movies and Christmas music. This guy, right. We need like a Christmas horror film.
Oh my God,
they've tried, but it's tough because Christmas music is too pure.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, the reason I went on that whole rant, and I'll wrap this up and we can move on, I know, but like the reason I want to say this is because I do believe that to our own detriment, we demonize people for having negative thoughts, right? But when we talk about racism, we're really talking about negative thoughts towards someone based on race, right? And one of the things that I don't think we're honest with ourselves enough about is the fact that if we had some sort of public broadcasting device and we could broadcast everyone's secret and private thoughts, we'll all be screwed.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. We'd all be ashamed because every single one of us has had a negative thought towards another person that's not going to be good for our public brands. Right?
I feel like I have a couple friends who I would be like, really? They didn't have any negative thoughts? Like there would be someone somewhere, but yeah.
But the reason I say this is because that's not what virtue is. Virtue has never been you don't have any negative thoughts. In fact, the reason why we even have moral codes is because it is a given that we are going to have moments where we say, oh, I just want to punch this guy in the face.
Yeah.
Right? That's why we need a moral code that says You can't solve problems through violence. We need that because our instinct is to solve problems in the easiest, most convenient way. And sometimes that's just being a jerk. Sometimes that's being impatient with people. Sometimes that's telling the people in your life, you know what? You've annoyed me today. Get out of my life. I'm done with you forever. The reason we need moral guidelines and insights and philosophers and sages to remind us over and over again is because our instincts and our private thoughts are ones where we often have all kinds of terrible thoughts about ourselves and other people. But virtue is what you do with that. And the person that I trust, the person that I want to be friends with, the person that I align with is not the person who can promise me that they've never, ever had a negative thought about me or people like me, but the person who says, you know what, in spite of the fact that I find it hard to like a certain group of people, I'm willing to work on myself and I'm willing to commit to do the right thing, not because it comes easily to me, but because I believe in what's right. And I think that's important because when we stop demonizing negative thoughts, we also stop giving an easy out to the people who have positive thoughts. And one of the main reasons why political manipulation is so easy is because people know how to say the right things to convince us that they're on our side. All they got to do is look at us and say, oh, I feel your pain. But man, that doesn't show me anything. You know what I mean? That's just saying the right thing. And we've sort of incentivized this unprecedented amount of virtue signaling today, where all you got to do is equate moods with morality and scream outrage at the right things, and we just give you a free pass like you're changing the world. But I don't give those free passes. You are a virtuous person when you are committed through action to creating results for yourself and other people. Committed through action, not just tweeting that you're mad about this and that, because that doesn't tell me what you're doing to make the world a better place.
Yeah. Totally agree.
We can have a whole episode on this, man.
We really could.
We're not even getting anywhere yet.
Let's wrap up this Maximal segment, y'all. TK, thank you for joining us today. How's office hours going?
Office hours is going really well, man. Isaac and I, we're done with season 3, and you can see the episodes on our Praxis YouTube channel. Check us out at discoverpraxis.com. Go to the podcast section at the top of the page. And check out Isaac and I with Office Hours. It's a good time. Yeah,
you can also get it wherever you get podcasts. It's just called Office Hours. You and Isaac do a great job. You have a great back and forth between the two of you. It even shows on social media as well. Also, check out TK Coleman, tkcoleman.com. You can find his blogs, his blog posts there, and sign up for his newsletter. I know I'm on it, and anytime that he writes a blog post, it just goes straight out to you. Thank you for being here today, TK.
Yeah, man. Really appreciate you.
Guys. Love you guys.
All right, y'all. Love people, use things. We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.